Let's make a short video about this fallacy, this nonsense from guys who keep thinking that there's no such thing as utilitarian love, that basically female companionship, right, isn't conditional, that it can be unconditional. These people who live in a little fantasy world. I have an old video. I think it was something called Hypergamy and Egalitarianism in Relationships. It came out at the beginning of this year. And I explain this well because what happens, right? Yeah, again, we have that dynamic from the beginning of the relationship, which has that honeymoon phase, which lasts at most like 2 years, in which the guy can manage a relationship just fine. An egalitarian relationship, the guy lives in his house, the woman lives in her house, the two go out together every now and then, each one pays their own bills. And then there comes a moment when the woman starts changing the conditions, right? The terms of the relationship without consulting the guy, or sometimes even consulting him, pressuring him. Basically, she's going to pressure you to become a provider, either partially or totally, in extreme cases. But so why do guys have this idea that, oh no, it's possible to have a chill relationship, right? Female companionship isn't conditional, it's not something utilitarian? It's because of the following. Many just cling to that beginning phase of the relationship. Not just men, women too. But in the case of women, they don't really think much about provision. They think more about that ecstasy of the beginning of a relationship. You know, that little phase of infatuation. And so there are many women who, because of current promiscuity, don't know how to operate outside of that. When this honeymoon phase ends, they think they don't like the guy anymore, they think it's over, and they have to jump to another relationship. But anyway, why are there so many young people, well, not just young, but even adults up to about 30, who still keep clinging to this idea of, oh no, I'm going to have an egalitarian relationship. You can have unconditional love or something like that. It's because of the following. I had already discussed this in that video from the beginning of the year. It's because of the issue of provision. Look, to keep a woman, right, I've said it several times, she'll have to either depend on you physically and or financially. What does that mean? It means it's totally conditional. Yeah, like in that stand-up bit by Chris Rock, where he said that only women, children, and pets are loved unconditionally. A man, he's only loved through provision. He is only loved if he provides something. So what happens? The guy's there, young, has a girlfriend here, a girlfriend there, a hookup here, a hookup there, and he keeps operating, right? Nowadays, up until his 30s, 35s like that, right? This is something very, very much from the PUA side, like from the red pill, like from Rollo Tomasi's crowd, maybe the realists. There are a lot of guys who say this, and they're right in a way. A man's value is resources and status. A woman's is fertility and youth. So a guy has to wait to close the deal, right? If he wants to get married and have kids, until he's at his highest possible market value to get the best deal. But look, in that period there, let's say from 15 to 35 years old, I'm only talking about men in this video. The focus is on them. I'm not going to talk about women. The guy has these girlfriends, and logically, the woman has her job or internship, college. She pays her bills, he pays his bills. Each one lives in their own place, but that's where the detail is. The guy thinks he doesn't have to provide. He thinks that female companionship isn't conditional and utilitarian because there's another person. There are third parties who are guaranteeing this provision for the woman, right? Yeah, if the woman's a little younger, she's in her college phase, has an internship, has a master's scholarship, something like that, you know? So you've got daddy state there guaranteeing the provision for the woman, and then the guy who's in a relationship with her at that moment, or the guys who were in a relationship with her at that moment, are the ones benefiting because you're getting access to female companionship, sex, and all that without having to provide, you know? So that's why the guy has that idea that, oh no, I don't have to provide, right? Then later, there are guys who usually freak out when they get a bit older and want something more serious, and then they discover, whoa, wait a minute, what do you mean? The terms weren't like that. And there's another thing that has to be taken into consideration. This reminds me a lot of Tricel's videos where he says the following. there are a lot of women nowadays who reach their 30s being supported, provided for by daddy, right? Yeah, as I always say, it doesn't have to be total support, it can be partial support. But look, she's been there from 15 to 30, sometimes even 35. I've seen these cases, right? She might even have a job, an internship, something like that, but still, a good portion of her income is coming from her father. And logically, she's free to have her own relationships, dating, casual relationships. So she's free to have these relationships. The guys are getting access to her without having to provide because there's someone else providing. At the end of the day, the father, really, man, the father nowadays, he's the provider. He's the provider. The father is a cuck. The guy raises the kid, supports him, just so some other dude can come along and sleep with her. There was even a little video from Porta dos Fundos that talked about this. But that's the thing. Guys don't realize that the whole thing is conditional. It's utilitarian. Because it's not him paying the bill, it's someone else paying the bill, right? It's daddy or daddy state or the dad who's paying the bill. And that's why it reaches that point, usually, where the woman is just having fun. Sometimes it's not just casual stuff, it could be actual dating. Just one boyfriend here, another boyfriend there, and so on. And then when she hits 30, 35, magically that moment arrives of, whoa, okay, now, like Newman says, right? I'm done with the fooling around. Now I want something serious. That's something we see a lot. One there, because she sees that, well, there's no longer that opportunity, perhaps, for a scholarship or an internship in college. She's already finished her master's, PhD, and all that, and now she's going to have to fend for herself. She's going to have to fend for herself in the job market, because you can't compare a scholarship or an internship with a job. In a job, you really have to deliver the service. You have to work for real. When you're in an educational institution, you can still slack off a bit. And then you also have to see that sometimes the parent is already kind of fed up with supporting them. Or in many cases, as happens nowadays, the father isn't even present anymore, right? There's already been a divorce and the guy is having to pay child support. So it can get to that point where, like, the woman has finished college, a master's degree, and then the father is no longer obligated to pay child support, right? Maybe he cuts it all off, or maybe cuts it off gradually. So that's where this need arises for the woman in her relationships, which until then she was handling just fine. An egalitarian relationship, she has her money, the man has his money, and the two just stay together like that, peacefully, without conditional factors. Then suddenly, no, now it has to be conditional, right? Now, to share in the woman's company, the guy is going to have to provide. He's going to have to be a partial or total provider there, because the partial or total providers that existed before don't exist anymore. And then there's another dangerous variable, right? Which is that people need to understand the issue of the epiphany phase, which is something Rollo Tomasi talks about a lot, which is the most dangerous phase to be in a relationship with a woman, which is between 25 and 35, which is precisely the phase where she starts to be more utilitarian, starts to demand more of a conditional, provisional factor in the relationship. And not only that, there's also baby fever, right? Baby rabies of suddenly wanting to trap a guy, wanting to have a child. And we know that often nowadays they use some other subterfuges to end up getting pregnant by the man without his consent, without him even knowing. It's that miracle of the pill that didn't work, right? The miracle of the condom that didn't work. We already know all about that. But you have to take these factors into consideration too. So in short, there's the issue of provision, whether from the state or from the father, which is running out. There's also the issue of baby fever, which is then another aggravating factor for the woman to demand more conditioning in the relationship, more utilitarianism. And there's also another thing I forgot to mention, which is this. In the epiphany phase, it's not just this part about the break in provision or wanting to have children, but it's also that moment when the woman, even if she doesn't admit it or only knows it subconsciously, starts to lose her physical appearance. And we already know that when physical appearance is lost, fertility also starts to decline. And then the woman realizes that a new crop of women is emerging, younger, more attractive, and more fertile than her, and that she won't be able to compete with them for much longer. So it's time to sell herself. It's time to close the deal. especially because she has likely already realized that the number of men interested in her, chasing after her, is much smaller at this stage, around 30 years old, than it was around 20 years old. So at the end of the day, it's no use. This whole issue of relationships is always conditional, always utilitarian. The detail is that sometimes you can have access to this relationship with some other sucker paying for it.